Hello there. Welcome back to the Schools of Excellence podcast. We are continuing a little bit of our series on my book, This Can't Be Normal, What to Do When Success Starts to Feel Like Survival. So this is a book that took me close to 5 years to write at this point. I started writing it in 2020 and did a lot of starting and stopping and then wrote all the things. And this is my most deepest personal and probably most rewarding professional work that I've ever done. So today I want to talk about the false promise of systems. There is a promise that many leaders quietly hold on to. And that is, once I train the team, I'll finally be able to rest. And this is one of the false promise of systems. I talk about this in chapter 2 of my book, The False Promise of Systems. And there's this feeling around, I just want to stop carrying everything alone. I want to stop being the person that is responsible for everything. I want partnership. I want real ownership. And leaders train, clarify, document, explain things again and again and again and again, because they keep telling themselves, once they really get it, once they really understand it, because right now they still don't understand it, but once they really understand it, that's the missing link. Then rest is here. Relief is here. Peace is here. But here you are, still answering questions, still holding pressure, still feeling responsible for outcomes that you are actually not responsible for. And I want to say this really gently, really kindly, and really clearly, okay? You did not misunderstand leadership. You believed a promise that confused training with behavior change. Training with behavior change. Training, teaching, coaching, mentoring, guiding. Those things are not behavior change. They can lead to behavior change, and sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. But you cannot measure your leadership by, well, the person's in the middle of being mentored. Okay, but are they changing their behavior? Are there new actions that are following training? Because if not, you're going to be in this loop forever. And that's a really harsh reality to sit with. And I want to respect the fact that hearing this will bring up resistance, because this promise is so baked into the psyche of leadership. It is so baked into how leadership gets trained that just train them more. You just didn't give them the right SOP. You just need to give them the right policy. You're missing step 79 in your checklist. Once you have that, then they're going to perform. Then they're going to do better. Then you're going to actually not have to carry this weight. And that's not true. Because if it is true, you wouldn't be carrying the weight, because you've already trained and you've already documented and you've already done every professional development and you've already done every SOP process system and everything, and you're still carrying the weight. And I want to sit here with you and give you a proverbial hug that there is nothing wrong with you, and there is nothing wrong with your training or your systems or your processes or your checklists. It is a false promise that systems create clarity, or that systems are actually going to solve your accountability issue, or that a process or a checklist or a reward system or a bonus or a raise or a profit sharing is going to move people into different action. It doesn't. And that's a very, very difficult reality to sit with, because it doesn't. It just doesn't. Training matters. Systems matter. I have all of those things, and I believe that every school should have them. But training transfers knowledge. It does not transfer ownership. Training transfers knowledge. It does not transfer ownership. Ownership comes at the edge of their comfort zone. When they meet their capacity, come face to face with it and oh, this is my growth edge. This is my capacity. I can't do this right now. I have to make a different move. I have to change my behavior. I have to change the way that I'm actually showing up. Oh, well, that's a totally different ask of me now. Leaders train and then they wait. They wait for fewer questions, fewer escalations, fewer emotional handoffs, but the handoffs keep coming and the questions keep coming and the escalations keep coming. There's a little bit less, but they're still there. Not because your people didn't learn, but because learning doesn't change the pattern. You need to change the pattern of behavior. So let me ask you a question. When a task is late, when a standard slips, when someone gets overwhelmed, what shows up first? Is it ownership? I did that. I was late. I see that going to be late on this task. Is there preemptive initiation? Is there ownership? Is there accountability? Or is there something what I call performing confusion? Because most leaders I work with don't have untrained teams. Their teams are actually trained to death. They have teams that are performing confusion. And I'll explain what performing confusion is because that distinction is really important to understand. Okay? Not all confusion is real. Actually, most confusion is not real. Some confusion is actually a behavioral strategy. And I call this performing confusion, as I said. So what you need to understand is people perform confusion not because they're malicious or because they're lazy. People perform confusion because it is the safest way to delay consequences of their actions, to avoid ownership, and to hand the weight back to the leader, move the weight back upwards. So what do I mean by that? People respond to patterns, not systems. Okay, people respond to patterns, not systems. So for years, whenever someone said, I'm confused, I used to slow down, soften the standard, or step in and fix it. So the pattern teaches your people confusion is where safety lives. If I act confused, then I can stay safe in my comfort zone. I don't actually have to go risk anything. I don't actually have to have ownership, meet the consequences of my actions, or hold the weight of my decisions and my choices. I just act confused and then someone else takes the weight. Now, this is all subconscious. And it's super important to understand that this is a subconscious thing. Your team is not being malicious at all. Let's talk about some examples of where performing confusion shows up, okay? And I talk about this extensively inside of my book as well. So I want to give you some examples that you'll recognize pretty immediately, okay? When you come to someone and you're like, hey, where's the report or where's the due date? Where's the whatever you needed them to give you, okay? And they say, I didn't realize it was due today. That's not confusion, okay? That's a tracking issue. That is, they were not tracking the due date. They were waiting for you to come forward and say, ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling, the due date is due today. But instead of saying, I didn't track it properly, I didn't put it in my calendar, I didn't manage my time well, I didn't scope it right, they're just like, oh, that was due today? So I had a director, I had an owner, who during training, the new teacher was coming in. It's the beginning of the school year in August. And one of the things they needed to do was they needed to label cubbies. And label all the kids' cubbies with their names on it. And so when the owner was going around, kind of before the first day of school, she went into one of the classrooms and the cubbies weren't labeled. And so the teacher's like, I wasn't sure what you meant by label cubbies. The owner didn't speak Chinese. She wasn't talking in hieroglyphics. She wasn't speaking in Morse code. She wrote very clearly what it means to label the cubbies. She actually put it in a spreadsheet. And she actually wrote an SOP. And there was actually a system. That's performing confusion when someone says, I wasn't sure what you meant by labeling the cubbies. What she actually means is I underestimated how long the work would take. And I just couldn't be bothered to ask clarifying questions. It's okay if you don't fully understand when someone says something, right? Let's say the owner said, you need to label the cubbies, and they put the SOP and they put the process, and the person sitting in front of you still doesn't understand it. That's okay. But it is on them to ask and say, I'm not sure I understand what you mean by label cubbies. Do you mean that every cubby needs to have the child's first name and last name and a picture? Like, what do you mean by that? But instead, we put all the onus on the owner of like, okay, so here's the SOP and here's the process, and make sure that every cubby has a first name and a last name and a picture. And she did all of that, and the person still didn't do it, which comes to show you this is not a systems issue, a process, or an SOP issue. It is a performing confusion issue. She saw very clearly she can read English from when she was 7 years old. She has reading comprehension. She has a high school diploma. She actually has a master's degree. She knows how to read English. And in the English SOP, it said, label cubbies. Every cubby should have a child's first name, last name, and picture of the child. There is no way in the effing world to be more clear than that. So when a teacher says, I wasn't sure when you meant by label cubbies, no, she did understand what you meant by label cubbies. She didn't track it properly. She underestimated how long it would take her to label 20 cubbies. So she didn't finish it in time. But instead of saying that and holding herself accountable, it's so much easier to say, I didn't understand what you meant. Because now you look like the idiot. Like, did I not explain that right? Oh, I need to say it again. I'm so sorry you didn't understand. Let me help you. Let me say it again. No. The real issues here are not confusion or lack of training or lack of SOPs or lack of processes. It's they underestimated how long it would take and they needed help scaffolding it and breaking it down, but they didn't ask for scaffolding and breaking it down. They didn't say, I have 3 priorities due on the same day and I need help sequencing it. They didn't say, I know the basics, but I don't understand how to use this specific tool that you want me to do in Bright Wheel, Kangaroo Time, name your software, okay? Because the real issue is now they have to own the consequence of that choice. Versus performing confusion means I could just say, I didn't understand what you meant. What do you want from me? I didn't understand. What, you're gonna punish me for not understanding? So most leaders respond in the exact same way. They give more clarity, more training, more SOPs, more processes, more time, more. And that's where exhaustion suffocates them. Confusion isn't solved with more clarity, my friends. It is solved with consequences, accountability, and rhythms. And I'm going to talk about that in some of the further episodes that we have here. Clarity without consequence teaches your people that they can stay vague and live in ambiguity, and you as the leader, you'll hold the consequence of it. And that is the pattern that keeps leaders trapped. It makes them perform steadiness. It makes them absorb invisible weight and pressure. It makes them wait their entire lives for rest that never arrives. Now, I'm going to do a whole nother episode, its own episode, of consequence as predictable safety. And consequence is what actually makes people feel safe. But I'm not going to go into that here. But I do want to frame that is a big part of the false promise of systems. So what I want to help invite you into here is training does not create relief or rest. Systems do not distribute emotional weight or invisible weight or create shared ownership and partnership. Clarity does not change behavior. Patterns do. Action does. Patterns only change when the leader stops rescuing you from confusion and from the consequences of your actions. And they start anchoring the team in standards through rhythm. I'm not going to teach that yet. I have other episodes I'm going to be talking about it. So a question to sit with, instead of saying, what else do I need to explain? Or what else do I need to train or teach or whatever it is? And start asking, what behavior am I protecting right now? So if this episode named something for you that you have felt deep in your bones, but couldn't articulate, there's nothing wrong with you. You did not fail leadership. You didn't miss a step. You believed a promise that told you that rest would come after training. It doesn't. And I wrote the book, This Can't Be Normal, for leaders who have trained the team and are still carrying the weight because leadership is not supposed to feel like endless days of clarifying, training, speaking, while quietly absorbing all of the pressure and the weight. The book is where I walk you through how patterns actually change behavior and how safety gets built without you becoming the system. And so for now, as we leave today's conversation, I want to invite you to just notice if confusion keeps showing up, maybe it's not confusion at all. And that realization is where real peace and calm and rest begins. Thanks for joining me. If you are loving the Schools of Excellence podcast and have gotten any value out of it for your school, I would love if you can do two things for me. One, subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. And two, can you please leave us a review? Reviews help other school leaders know that this is the place to learn how to build a school of excellence. And I would be so grateful if you can do that for us. Your help and support makes this show to be able to be listened by the thousands of other school leaders all around the world. Thanks so much for listening, for giving us your time and attention each and every week, and I appreciate that you have joined us.